All right, we're recording. Welcome to the June 21st edition of the API Machinery SIG meeting. Maybe I'll present my screen. I will share this guy. All right. Cool. Okay, Clayton, are you on? Do you want to? Okay. There's discussion needed about whether API aggregation should be on by default.
Yeah, so at the last community meeting, when Aparna was going through the list of things, she brought up CRD going directly to beta, and a bunch of people thought that she was talking about, well, the discussion was about CRD going directly to beta, but people thought about API aggregation, and that spawned a discussion of some people were surprised that API aggregation was on by default. There was a discussion in the community features repo about whether it is appropriate. It was out of tree in 1.6 in an alpha state. We graduated the API to beta, but then we also added in-tree out-of-the-box support to the API server.
Yeah.
Proxy, there was concern about that being on by default. Even though it's a beta API, the feature is novel and new. It has an impact to deployment strategies.
So I think there is, it's kind of weird the way we talk about APIs being beta without like the status of the API has really literally nothing to do with the status of the feature.
Yeah.
The API being beta just means that we're willing to support it and be backwards compatible on into the future. The question here is if the feature is beta quality or not.
Yep. Well, and not only that, but like I would say that people often conflate the API and the feature. It is an important thing for the project to use this as a precedent to make the discussion about graduation a little bit clearer, so that, you know, if the next time this comes up, there's precedent to fall back on and to record it, whatever happens here.
I have to say I'm not very, the thing that I'm more amenable to is why can't we turn it off if we need to? It being on by default is the way I think it should be. So,
well, I think one of the things Clayton's saying is simply that we need to make sure that people understand what we mean. Use the word beta here, and that like this doesn't contradict anything else, because there's confusion on that one.
Well,
so I think somebody has an AI to clarify that.
Well, I also think we should just talk about what it means when we say it's on by default. I mean, I think what that sentence means is that you will pass through aggregation code on a request. If you actually want to aggregate, you have to turn on the API you want to aggregate, right? Yes. So I think we need to, just in case people aren't clear, right? There's two things you could be discussing when you say that aggregation is on by default.
Yeah.
And what's actually going on is just you're passing through aggregation default in a pass-through mode.
Yeah, it's like we rearrange some code. Like, we're not going to get everybody in the entire community to buy in every time we rearrange some code. So
well, and I think it's really important though to distinguish with, if you have an internal refactor that impacts everybody, when we talk about the impact to everybody else, how do we message that, and how does everybody kind of get buy-in? Because that's part of the concern, right? Is if kubeadmin went and changed how the API server was set up, and this SIG didn't have a discussion with it, there's a question of, we need to make sure as SIGs that we're working together to clarify the impact to the attached users or SIGs or.
So, but in that case, I believe that the impact of this code being in should be nothing. Like, nobody should even notice.
Right. I don't think that's the contention. Like, we don't need to clarify it to each other here. I think the follow-up action is for somebody, like, there are at least two things, because Daniel said another one, that people could be confused about the meaning of things. That the follow-up action is to make sure those people get it, that we have it written down someplace what's really going on and why this isn't breaking any of the rules, or why it may not impact you as much as you're afraid that it will. And it might be good to also like add to our lists of like how we decide when a feature is ready to ship, or what we do when we ship a feature, that like we make sure the messaging is clear. Being clear to other people in the API machinery SIG means almost nothing.
Yeah, that's really important.
I think if it's not nothing, then that's a bug that should be fixed, right? That's what
Right.
that's
Yep.
suite should verify.
Just so everybody who's maybe new to this discussion is kind of aware of kind of the context and background, is like we're trying to change from a model where a bunch of independent teams do whatever they have to do to get to the next gate, and as long as it works, it doesn't matter, to one where at a minimum we are explicitly communicating and making sure we have a clear, set up precedents across the different SIGs, specifically so that we have a looser model than, it's all driven within like this very tight-knit engineering organization. And that is where a lot of this concern comes from, not necessarily about the specific issue, about the precedent and establishing that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's super hard to get anything done in this project, and the harder we make it, it gets even less fun. So
This SIG is often asked to do a lot of things that are very hard and very ugly. However, this SIG does have a perception problem outside, and I'm as guilty of any of this as anyone, as being somewhat of a, how do I say, aggressively maneuvering unit, which is good, but it also, it is a valid criticism that we don't do a good enough job of communicating broadly about impact and making sure that we're soliciting buy-in. Turning it on by default is a little bit of that, but it's just, you shouldn't have to notice. However, still, like when SIG API Machinery says, we can go do this and turn it on because it doesn't impact the rest of you, that's not enough, right? It's got to be, and we have adequately communicated. So I think that's really where the root of this particular topic comes from.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much sympathy I have for that. Like,
No,
I even made I don't even think this deserved a features repo entry, but I made one and stated at months ago that it was going to be on beta and on by default was our target. What could we have done to spread this even more widely? Show up in the community meeting and
You
picture
already said it in the community
or
meeting. I personally said it in the community
Yeah.
meeting.
And there's actually a record of that and all that, but I think it's a good thing to say, like, maybe this would have been the way to do it, which is having to justify why it's on by default afterwards is less good than if we're a little bit more deliberate as a SIG at describing the path and the process. Like in this case, API aggregation has never been in tree as a feature. It was outside, and now it's inside, and it is on that gray area between, like, there's a reason why we like to do things alpha and then give people time to react. And when we cross
we did have it alpha. It was available at the beginning of the year.
in 1.6,
Yeah, you could have run an aggregator in 1.6. You would have hit a lot of bugs.
As someone who did run an aggregator in 1.6 for development, it was very difficult to get up
Yes.
and running and was not particularly amazingly documented.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you kind of had to be one of those people who would bang your head against a wall until the wall breaks down. So I'm not sure.
But that's
Like-
alpha, right?
And would you say that we took that feedback and incorporated it, and now the Cube API server with the aggregator built in is not painless, but significantly.
It's trending in the right direction.
It's way easier to use in 1.7.
Okay, somebody, I'm going to reach somebody.
If not.
Okay. Sorry, David, I muted you. I don't know what's wrong with your with your system. Okay. So I don't know. I don't feel like we got an action item out of that. Like,
so I think the action item would be to make sure that all the I's and T's are crossed now and the justifications are recorded in the issue so that we have something to fall back on, and then be open to continue the discussion. I mean, really this was I don't think it's unreasonable for somebody to come in and ask a SIG, are you jumping directly to beta? And this is close. Like, I mean, I particularly don't have a problem with it, but it's close. And when people do that, that starts to erode some of the, like, let's give these things time to soak. And that's the challenge, right?
Yeah, so I guess like if we, yeah, the release happens, you know, once every 3 months. If we don't get it in this release, if we don't if it's not on by default this release, nobody's going to use it. We won't have any feedback, and we'll just have the same argument next time.
I had a discussion with Brandon about this, but like one of the things that he suggested was more clearly communicating that this is a novel new thing. When you turn API machinery on, it's beta, making sure that we have good things, which is you're still opting in to turning on API aggregation, like ignoring the refactor in the code, but the act of installing a new API aggregation extension is beta, and it is opt-in because you have to do that. And therefore it fits within the criteria of it is opt-in, right? It's still gated to a reasonable degree.
Is opt-in a requirement for beta? I've never seen that documented as a requirement for beta.
I think my point is that we're crossing really, really like I understand I absolutely understand this. This is like, we feel like we're hot dogging it, and the ask is to be better at communicating, to be not so hot dog looking. And so if that involves us saying like the impact of this is very minimal because you can simply remove all aggregated API extensions and you fall back. And we've had, 2 months of soak time on the core code that's just a refactor, therefore we're okay. That might be enough, but that's not what's being communicated. We're just kind of saying, well, it was already an alpha, right? So.
Yeah, I think there could be a follow-up item here as well to answer the question that you asked earlier, Daniel, which is what could we have done? Like literally, is there a step we missed? Is the community step where you have an obvious place to run this past people, right? I don't know where that is exactly, or like when we would have done it, but maybe we aren't asking ourselves the right question for next time. Because this won't be the last time. It's likely to be the first time as we break things apart further and further, right? People get confused about this stuff.
Yeah, and as the SIG that probably causes the most refactoring for other SIGs, at least recently, we need to be conscious of the fact that causes challenges to other SIGs. And so we've kind of eroded some of our, what's the word for it, cushion of, this is just a change, it won't affect you.
Capital.
I don't know. I feel like we've taken on some grungy things that don't necessarily fall under our SIG, but we're blocked on it and nobody else is doing it.
But that doesn't mean that people aren't impacted. Like, that's what I'm saying is it's okay for us to do this. We just need to get better at communicating and messaging, right? Like if we had said, hey, we're going to refactor the whole code base and, probably when we do these things, we just need to get better at preloading it rather than post-loading it.
So I think where Daniel's trying to go with this is it should be okay to unapologetically refactor so long as we continue to honor the contract that we say we honor and prove that through the test suites. Is that right, Daniel?
Yeah, it's sort of like, I don't necessarily want to be a full-time politician, right? Like,
I mean, welcome to open source, right?
Yeah. I mean, a little bit is fine, but yeah, it feels very hard to get things done in this project, and I think a lot of people feel like they're stakeholders, and that's good, and I want people to feel invested and all that, but there comes a point where if you have to get buy-in from 50 people to do anything, then effectively nothing is going to happen, right?
So the new model, the model that's been discussed is that we are moving more aggressively to lazy consensus. And I think to the point about refactors that don't touch anybody else, I think those are pretty clear, and we just should communicate that aspect of it better. And then when we do cross boundaries, we need to be more aggressively communicating it. So that lazy consensus can do its work, right? Like, I think you're right. Like, it's not ask for forgiveness, but it's we're making everything better. Here's how we're going to do it. We've taken into account concerns and we've at least made sure you're aware of it. Like that kind of stuff, I think is some of the iceberg to the more recent discussions.
Yeah, I don't like my action item here of communicate more next time.
Well, and it also sounds like there's communicate a proposal and wait for consensus versus communicate a proposal and just go do it versus don't communicate because we forgot and then people get angry.
I also think, just as someone who like kind of vaguely pays attention to new features in this area, but is not, on the call all the time, sometimes it feels like things are advertised a little bit later, and people would be a little bit less surprised if they were like kind of aggressively advertised at the beginning. Hey, we like, for instance, API aggregator. Hey, we have this alpha API aggregator. Please go check it out because it's probably going to become more central in a release or two. Versus, oh hey, do you remember that API aggregator thing that was out of tree? Well, now it's in tree. Like if the communication had been moved a little bit earlier, kind of in the life cycle of the aggregator, people might have been a little bit less surprised or concerned.
We have a concrete notion of that, right? Because the proposal was updated last November. We updated the proposal again earlier in the year. In March, we announced at the community meeting that this was the intent. We had a feature issue that got created in 1.7. And in the first weeks of 1.7, it was available. So that was communicated 7 months ago. It was communicated 5 months ago. It was communicated 4 months ago. It was communicated 3 months ago.
Yeah, and just to add to that, like, Clayton, have you guys considered what's going to result if everybody decides that they need to communicate early and often? Like,
oh, this is not just like this is coming up in a lot of context. I think it, for better or worse, API machinery, because it goes and gets so much done, and because it has so much impact, and because it is so important, like it gets picked as example in these. But like, cluster lifecycle changing, how Kubernetes did HA, or some of those things are like great examples of like.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is the communication paths scales with it's like n squared. Like if there's 20 groups and all of them are doing a change that affects a lot of people, that's like an awful lot of communication.
So I do want to correct. I don't think it's necessarily that there needs to be an increase in the quantity of communication, right? I think that it's possible that we simply didn't say the right stuff at the earliest opportunity. Like we just recounted that like n months ago and n-1 months ago, and that's fine. It's possible we didn't need to say it that many times, but that we didn't say the right stuff early enough,
or we didn't say it in the right place. I just worry.
Ask the right questions. Maybe it's not about saying, but about asking. Is this cool? Does anybody have objections?
Well, I kind of worry that if everybody's communicating like this, it's going to burn the comments basically. Like, yeah, so I was out for one day and I had 200 emails this morning. Like if everybody communicates broadly, then it's going to destroy the communication form because no one.
The SIG architecture was one of the points, one of the ways, right, of doing more of that kind of like, hey, architecturally, we're going to change it so that a bunch of traffic for extensions flows through the masters. That'll be a place that could be discussed. And I think it was more about trying to avoid the n squared by making sure that on each of the SIG sides, instead of trying to do the n square, you try to focus on the SIGs that are most impacted. And that it does require a little bit of outreach. I actually think the SIG did a good job of communicating. Like as I was going through and responding to some of the comments, I was dredging up the emails and discussions. I will note that the proposal still doesn't talk about aggregation. So that's to the point about maybe the right place for those. We've talked about it in many forums, but maybe we need to do a slightly better job of focusing some of the places where we record these so that we do have that record. That might be one small bit of feedback.
So sorry to keep beating this dead horse, but I imagine a hypothetical where we communicated too much. How would we know? I think people would actually still complain that we hadn't communicated enough. Like, how do we know that
That's not the problem
how,
right now.
yeah, how do we avoid overcorrecting, basically? Like, I think we probably could have communicated better, but I also feel like it's really easy to get into a pattern where no matter how much you communicated, everybody says you should communicate more. Like, oh, I didn't hear about this. Why didn't you communicate it to me? Like, we can't be responsible for everybody hearing about it. So how do we know when we have like done a made a good faith effort to communicate, and like, where's the line?
Yeah. I was going to say I was surprised when I heard that Cluster Lifecycle thought they hadn't been communicated to, because they actually accepted polls that enabled and made the aggregator proxy story actually work. And I opened those polls, they were reviewed and they were merged, and they were surprised that it was present.
And that's a great point. I think what I would say is there's smoke. I'm not saying that we've got a giant fire, but there is smoke. And so like maybe I would say is I think that the hypothetical is absolutely valid. If we're going to target communication more effectively, or if we're going to do more at central communication of like, here's the big changes coming to Cube from SIG API Machinery, maybe that's one, concrete. Is it something that's more accessible than, oh yeah, we have 700 issues for this? I don't know, but I do kind of think that the complaints might be a little overstated in some cases, but I don't think they're overstated to the point that the people are wrong. They don't know.
I think what I'm taking away from this is I'm just going to make sure I have a slot in the community meeting early on in the release cycle to say what we're going to do. And
I'm going to propose one more thing that's not really an action item for Daniel exactly. I'm not sure who should follow up on it. It's an idea. It might be easier to keep track of this sort of inter-SIG communication, sort of like these heads up about stuff that's coming, or if instead of coming in the form of bugs filed at random intervals or features or community meetings, what if there was a weekly newsletter that effectively covered this stuff, right? Like there's one post, and if I can't read anything else, I can read those, right?
I mean,
highlights of big changes that are big enough that they should be mentioned outside their own SIG. That's it.
That's what the community meeting is for, partially, isn't it?
To some degree, but I think it's a form that not everybody can make the community meeting at 1 p.m. on a Thursday. But I think that a complement to that would make a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and whether it's that or not, I mean, I like that idea from Matt, but I think the one thing we haven't said that needs to be said is there should be one place where this stuff is recorded, where we can say, look, the community has agreed. This is where we put it. We say it once in a newsletter or whatever it is, and we all agree that if it's been said there, you can ask questions, whatever. But at that point, Daniel is essentially off the hook. And I think that's important, because the more places we keep repeating this stuff and the more things we have to say, I think, in fact, to Daniel's earlier point, the messages will get lost. Like, you're not going to know about something because it becomes too long didn't breathe.
Yeah, and
So
we made the features repo. Well, I guess what I'm hearing,
I was going to say the same thing.
that was actually insufficient. So
I think just writing down how these things are communicated would help a lot. I think there's one kind of communication for breaking changes to an API, deprecation, for example. That requires a lot more legwork because there is absolutely going to be impact. And there's another bucket, which is there's no intended impact. There may be additional functionality, and this is how those will be communicated, and we can skip alpha or, I think in Daniel's beautiful dream future, there is trust enough that anything that doesn't change the behavior is kind of up to the SIG completely. And that does requires a different path. Is that fair?
yeah, I think for me in this project, probably a year ago at this point, at some point I had to come to be okay with the fact that I can't keep track of everything, and people are going to go off and do things that I don't agree with, and I just have to make my peace with that. And I think people are just going to have to make their peace with that.
But things that require action on their part do require additional communication. right? Like,
Yeah, if you're forcing people to do something, you should probably give them at least advance warning. Now, this change, I don't think we actually are forcing people to do things. We actually made the change this way so that people wouldn't have to do things.
And I mean, increasingly, we won't be able to determine whether or not that's really true.
Yeah.
Right? Like if as there become 2,000 SIGs or whatever, right? Like we won't really be able to know. And so I think it's really important to figure out some way to let people know we don't think this will break you. Yeah. But I'm telling you that anyway. Also, like it avoids people complaining that they
I mean, we're all humans, right? Humans don't necessarily behave completely rationally when it comes to communication, and it's about giving just enough communication that people can reliably find out what they're interested in and have no excuse for not knowing that something was coming and getting better at that.
Okay, have we beat this horse to death?
Hope so.
Okay, David, you want to talk about or were you hoping to do a demo, or what's this line item?
Yeah, I was actually hoping to do a demo. I have the aggregator set up. I've just launched up local up cluster, and I'd like to demonstrate a particular API server, and it won't let me share my screen.
Yeah, I probably have to do something.
It says you need to stop sharing. This is interesting.
Oh,
Can you
stop.
stop sharing?
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Okay.
All right. And I am now looking for me. I think you should all be looking at a terminal right now.
Yep.
All right. So that aggregator that people don't necessarily want on by default, I am going to go ahead and show how it works. Right. One of the problems that we have today is that when you use RBAC and you try to subdivide your cluster, you end up subdividing permissions on namespaces. But you have a choice. You can either have someone see all available namespaces, like the cluster admin can do right here that I demonstrated, or you make it so that they cannot see namespaces. So if I try to do the same request as David can't see the namespaces. But what you probably want is for someone to be able to see the namespaces they're allowed to see when they do a list. And so I'm going to aggregate in an API server that actually does this. In OpenShift, we call these projects. So I'm creating a namespace, and I'm creating a few things in that namespace. All I did just a normal kubectl create. I'm making my API service object and some permissions, and then some resources to actually create it. And now we can check to see the status of the API service. We'll see if it is up and running.
David, can you scroll down? We can't see the bottom of your screen. Or I can at least.
No, I can't either.
Yeah, the bottom of your screen is cut off.
Oh my goodness. That's both bad and annoying. What's the last thing you see?
Status true.
That's true. That is the bottom of the screen. Okay, there we go. I'll keep everything above there. Okay. So the API service is ready to use. You can see that I have pods. I think you guys can't see what I'm typing. You saw that. So now we have the namespaces, we have pod, and so I'm going to do a get projects. And as the cluster admin, you can see I have a few projects. If I do the same call as David, you'll see that I have no projects. That's because I have no permissions to see any of these namespaces. So now I need to get a namespace as David, and so there is a way to do it. I'm not allowed to create any namespace that I want, but I can create a resource, and I have an example of what the resource looks like. I can create a project request resource, and this will actually provision a namespace for me. So I am going to go ahead and new one of these up. And it says that it created a project request. And when I get the projects as David, you can now see there's a project in the list. If I get namespaces, you can see that the project is actually a namespace, and I'm getting namespaces as the cluster admin here. The namespace exists. And it's present. Now, if I have another user, say Daniel, Daniel will not be able to see my project. However, if I were to find Daniel, let's say I trust Daniel a lot. I'm going to let him mess around with
Bad plan.
clearly he'll do God knows what and make everything beta. I'll add him as an editor to one of my existing projects, and this is just using a normal RBAC role binding. And now when I get projects as Daniel, I am able to see the OpenShift project that I created. So this is just an example of an API server that can be built with aggregation that is impossible to build with something like custom resources. And it provides an APA filtered view of a particular resource, and it is an extremely valuable example. And sorry for all the scrolling, but I guess my screen was unhappy. Any questions from anyone?
It's pretty cool.
That's a nice demo, actually.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's quick and like, assuming somebody bumped up against this before, like, I think they'll like it right away.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there so that people could see.
So is that sitting out in a repo somewhere where anybody could use it?
The image or the project?
Yeah, the API server that's supplying the project resource.
Yeah, well, it's not in the Q repo. It's a projection of an OpenShift resource actually. It's an API server that serves the OpenShift project API.
What about the controller that implements it?
It's inside that API server.
Okay.
So
Cool. So this is really an example of grabbing a OpenShift resource piecemeal.
Yeah, I wasn't going to emphasize its OpenShiftness, but yes, it is an OpenShift resource.
And one of the I think that's actually a pretty good demonstration of what the concept is for. I mean, it could be any PaaS like it, right? It doesn't have to be OpenShift.
Yeah.
But if OpenShift were built modularly, such that logical resource groups were served out of single APIs, like you could mix and match.
Yeah.
And
yeah, this one happens to be a pretty good example that we have. It's something that people who turn on RBAC often hit. So it's an example that they would care about.
Yeah, I think explicitly that is why we're making the aggregation layer. Like we think we should do that not just with OpenShift resources, but also Kubernetes resources, right? Like the ones that are optional. You should be able to choose which are installed. This is a good way to do it.
Yep.
All right, cool. Thank you. So there is a question about a TypeScript.
Yeah. So actually, I think Brandon is not here. So he actually asked if he can add TypeScript to our set of clients. I don't have any. One, you guys know that we are going to have TypeScript, JavaScript, both. They're close, but I will shift most of my attention to JavaScript. And Brandon, I think he will spend some time on TypeScript.
TypeScript, to be clear, is like a wrapper layer for JavaScript.
Yes.
That in theory adds type safe checks or something.
Classes, types of class, and it compiled to JavaScript. It also supports any JavaScript code inside it.
Why? Just to be devil's advocate, why do you need couldn't you use a regular JavaScript client from within TypeScript?
I think you can, but if you actually create a TypeScript client, it would be nicer.
Okay. A
nicer client. But theoretically, you should be able to use one of them instead of the other.
Yeah, I mean, if I mean, my opinion with regards to clients is if you can find two people to own it, then like you can have a repo and knock yourself out.
That's exactly it. That's exactly what I think.
But one thing
from the Swagger spec, just like the other ones.
It's generated from Swagger spec, generated with Swagger code gen, so there is no problem there.
Yeah, yeah. The only thing with clients is people really rely on the documentation and versioning to figure out what the status of the client is. So you need to work hard to make sure that is correct.
Yeah, and as far as this alpha, that doesn't mean anything. It can be anything. So all of these clients going to be in alpha. I just wanted to let you guys know that SIG API Machinery is the supporter of all these clients if they ever get out of alpha.
Okay. People are adding items faster than we can go through them. So let's keep on going. Paul, you want to talk about having a feedback cycle between this SIG and people building your API servers?
Yep.
You feel like there isn't a feedback cycle right now?
I do think that that is true, that there is, I think there is technically one. I don't think it's especially great. I do want to say that my own personal opinion is that the aggregator stuff is fantastic. And I will just, like, as a quick aside, for those that might be watching on YouTube or in the call that don't already know me, like, I've been leading a service catalog SIG over the last, I guess, like 10 months now. And I did a very hard sell of the aggregator to a very skeptical crowd when we started down the road of, yes, we do need to build a user API server instead of relying on like CPRs, because we need certain features that we can only get that way. And for whatever it's worth to the folks on this call, like I said, there was a lot of skepticism. And now that people are seeing the aggregator working, we had a demo of the aggregator aggregating together the core API server and service catalog API server. I think people in service catalog group are really enthusiastic about it. And I have been really pleased with the quality of the experience on that thing. So kudos to you guys for the work that you've done on it. For whatever that's worth, to offset maybe a little bit of some of the, yes, gushing praise is an appropriate thing to go into the notes. I would have said effusive, but, you know, if you want to use gushing, totally fine. So yeah, good job on the API aggregator. And like, it really is pretty awesome to see like the vision for this stuff that like a lot of us have had in our heads for a long time coming together and being something that we can show people now. So good job, guys.
Given what you've just said, I feel a huge butt is coming on.
No, there is no but. Here's my story, is that we had started building Service Catalog API server on the, I think this must have been like 1.5 candidate machinery. Yep. We had a rebase for 1.6 candidate machinery. And then first thing Monday morning, when I checked my email, I saw that somebody, or maybe it was last week, don't remember, I saw very early in the morning someday that someone's first contribution to the Service Catalog Incubator repo was rebasing onto the 1.7 candidate machinery, which I certainly applaud the ambition. I think that is a very challenging first pull request to make. But the takeaway from that is that I realized to myself, one, in Service Catalog SIG, we had not thought about the cadence that we do those releases, or sorry, cadence that we do those rebases on. And then in thinking about that, I realized that, and I will say in advance, I do not claim to have read every piece of written communication, since that has been a theme of this meeting. I come to you as an ignoramus, clothed in burlap, dirty, part of the unwashed masses. My question to this group would be, how do I know what specific versions I should rebase onto? And
yeah, so
one corollary. Forgive me, Daniel, my brain is much slower than yours, but it gets the job done if you give it enough time. The corollary would be like, what would be like the communication channel we'd use to communicate things like, there was a bug that I know that David had fixed where we were putting things into the wrong place in etcd. So I would view that as like you definitely want this fix type of situation. What's the communication channel for that? EOF.
Okay, so I want to say about versioning, the sort of object level answer to this question is we're lockstep with Kubernetes right now with the main repo. We're going to continue to be lockstep with the main repo until we start doing development in its own repo.
Accepted and understood and agreed with.
Yeah, and at that point, we haven't been, we need a systematic answer for how do we version the non-main repos. We have a thing that we've cobbled together for the client Go repository. We need to formalize that a little bit more and distribute it amongst our other repos because I don't think we're versioning them super well. I think probably what it's going to look like is we're going to maintain release branches in development and develop and master. And we'll probably be making incompatible changes in master, and people will need to vendor in a branch. And as we find bugs, we'll fix them in master and you know, just like any other library, we're going to have the whole 9 yards.
So the other thing worth mentioning, Paul, this is Walter. I'm actually deliberately on the SIG service catalog specifically to try and help the communication between service catalog and API server with regards to aggregator.
Okay, that is excellent. And I remember you having been in the same room with Sunil in prior meetings, so that's good. I think the only facet of this that hasn't already gotten into the notes and into the conversation so far in this meeting is it would be, as a user of the machinery, it would be awesome to be able to understand the changes that I would have to make when I do the rebase. So as an example, like I said, we've been on this pretty old candidate, 1.6 candidate machinery. And when this person came along and did the rebase, they were like, oh, well, this takes away insecure. I did not expect that. And I don't think that's a failure of anybody. I'm only illustrating like those kinds of things would be awesome to know, like, hey, there is a new version that all works together. If you need these features, if you need these fixes, use it. Know that you may have consequences in your code because of X, Y, and Z things. I realize saying that is a big ask. And
okay, we've got 15 minutes left and still 3 items, so I want to kind of wind this down. Paul, I think the things you are asking for are things that people have asked for in the client Go repository, like literally everything you're asking for. So like
that doesn't surprise me.
Right now is basically have a functioning change log and actually populate it correctly. We have a change log in the client Go. We are still working on figuring out how to populate it correctly. I think our plan for the client Go repository is to ask for people to do a client release note and PRs. But I think once we actually get development working in separate repositories, we can have the release note mechanism. We can require just one release note mechanism, like your release note goes into the change log for that repository. So I think that's the ultimate answer there.
Okay.
And as far as what are the communication channels?
I don't expect that to be something that we solve in this meeting. I only bring it up not having a lot of time to think about it. I'll keep thinking about it, and I expect it'll be a discussion. That's all.
But at least we need to keep changelog up to date.
I have a question about that, or at least like 2 ideas. Immediately when you brought this up, the changelog is definitely a good idea. It's pretty clear though that we're building a library that's going to be user community. Normally there would be, at least in my mind, an announce mailing list and a users mailing list. I know that Daniel would love for there to be more mailing lists for us to send communication to each other on. But one of the things is that as we
Yeah,
continue to move in this direction, some of us can unsubscribe from the global Kubernetes man list and focus on our users, right?
Yeah,
What does that sound right to you, Paul, or not?
that's actually probably a really good idea. Make a users and announce mailing list for API machinery.
That sounds very, very close to what I would ideally want. I think that is a good observation.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, thanks for listening. I'll share my slam poetry about API machinery in the next meeting since we're running low on time.
Okay, thanks. Sorry for cutting this off. So
This is an announcement too. Again, we're deprecating 1.2. Brian told me that we need to do it sooner than later.
yes.
kubectl will not be ready until 1.8, so we are announcing it 1.7, and we're going to remove it 1.9.
Yep. Any objections? Going once, going twice? Okay. Okay, I'm going to say that we don't actually have time to plan for 1.8 in this meeting.
So I added that. This is Jago. I joined Google a couple months ago as an engineering manager on this team. And as we get close to 1.8, I just wanted to refresh everyone's memory. It looks like you guys put together 1.7 doc with a bunch of great ideas. That was a copy of a 1.6 doc. So I would expect in the next week or so, maybe I can just copy over the 1.7 doc and we can have a discussion there.
Yeah, I will fill in my short list, which is short. It's got 5 items. I will fill that in after the meeting. Maybe we should put this on the agenda for next time and actually reserve a block of time.
Yeah, and just one more plug. We are trying to view this release as no new features, excepting where they are to improve API aggregation and stuff like admission controllers, but focus on quality and finishing what we started. So hope we can push that across the community as well.
Yeah, and I've been telling everyone my agenda is changes that reduce technical debt, and a valid subset of those are changes that put the technical debt in somebody else's repository, so extension points.
Can we move to the next slide?
Yes. Okay, removing API server count. Okay.
Yes. Here, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
This is Ivan from Chorus. So for the issue, we actually want to Abhinav, who is our intern this summer, to work on this.
Can you get closer to your mic? We're actually having a hard time understanding this.
Okay, sorry. So this is Ivan from Chorus, and so Abhinav is our intern this summer. So we want to give him this issue to work on, but not sure what's the actual status of this one. Saw a bunch of PRs linked to the one. I think there's one PR that's using the config map to implement the issue, to fix the issue, but it's being closed. Not sure what's the final decision on this one. We're trying to come up with the proposal and trying to discuss what's the direction we should go here.
Why are you working on? Why is this important to you?
Because we are trying to use this in the Tectonic, for multiple API server. Currently, we have a workaround to put the API server behind a load balancer, but we actually want to use the feature being able to have multiple endpoints available.
I don't understand why that means you need to remove the flag.
Yeah, Daniel, I don't remember. I don't know if you remember many moons ago, you and I worked together on modifying some of the code so that we could make the endpoint reconciler pluggable, because if you have multiple API servers and some of them come up and go down, the list of endpoints doesn't get modified at all. So especially if you have one that goes down for whatever reason and you try and hit the service for Kubernetes, if one of those backing API servers is down, it's still going to try and direct traffic there and it'll fail. And so this particular GitHub issue is about making the list of API servers and the endpoints that back the service, the Kubernetes service, dynamic, as opposed to having a static API server count and not being able to route around failures when API servers go down.
Yeah, that's all right. Thank you.
Yeah, I understand what it's about. Like, why is it important to do this now as opposed to in the future?
Because we just need this interconnect.
Okay.
Maybe I can ask a different, which is what is it that you would like to get from bringing this up in this meeting? I'm not sure I understand the question. That was my next question.
Just needs to like to see if there's someone we can have to help shepherd this feature.
So to sort of make sure that you're writing the right code and then do the code review for it afterwards.
Yeah, basically we want to start a proposal and want to know who we should talk to.
Great. That's a great question. Who should they talk to?
I don't
We
know.
probably own the API server, right? This is specific to the Kube API server. If I remember this issue correctly, this is the ancient one we dealt with, like in 3.4, Andy.
Yeah, it's been a while.
So if this is the one that is about the special service for Kubernetes service,
yep,
then I think it is specific to the Kube API server, right? I don't think any other API server would experience this problem because they would all go behind a normal service with a normal endpoint running out of a pod.
Right.
But the Kube API server is special.
So I probably do have a lot of opinions about this, but I don't know that I am going to have, like, just realistically speaking, I don't know that this is going to fall on the top of my list. So I'm not sure what to say off the top of my head.
Can you not really for AI to find somebody else?
I would certainly be interested in seeing the approach that you would want to take regardless. The review time, I think, is going to be a little bit harder to come up with.
Yeah.
My suggestion would be to get the review in soon, since this is a pretty freed up time in the release cycle. If it comes in after the end of July, it will get stuck in the queue. I think I saw that it was an internship project, so I would say the earlier the design proposal comes through, the more likely you will be to get feedback. And
yeah, I have to, like, honestly, I'm not 100% sure this is a great internship project. It sounds simple, but I suspect that it's going to be hard to get a review that everybody, or a proposal that everybody agrees with.
So maybe something less contentious, or maybe like 3 options for an internship project, and you might be more successful in that.
What options?
No, I was suggesting that you come up with 3 options and post it to the new users group that will be created sometime in the next week or so. But this one sounds like it's somewhat contentious, and just seeing how those contentious features go that are not high priority, the silence you're hearing here is probably not a good sign.
Yeah.
I think this group could definitely use to have a list of starter projects and a list of intern project suggestions. Because
there was at one point they needs help or something.
Yeah, there's a needs help. There's a help wanted, and there's a label. Yeah. I'm not quite sure what to say. Maybe contact me on Slack or send me an email, which I will star, and sometimes I get back to the start emails. So I don't know. Maybe this is something you feel like you might want to take on, Walter?
I can take it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So maybe you can get some review time from Walter here.
Okay.
Something on his Chef Taco. Yeah, maybe just action item to come up with starter projects in general. Thanks for bringing it up, though.
Starter projects in some areas are more difficult than others.
You can also, I don't know if I can shepherd, but you can also ping me for reviews on this, because I seem to vaguely recall having done some work on this at some point in time, but I can't for the life of me actually find that.
I think you were the one that prototyped the initial resource that Gordon and I both talked about.
Yeah,
Okay.
so you wrote part of it, Paul wrote part of it, I wrote part of it, so the three of us together got it through, at least in the OpenShift side.
All right. I think we are out of time. So thanks, everybody. See you in 2 weeks.